Well, as most of you know, in this congregation, our pastors mostly follow what's called the lectionary, which means that each Sunday, 4 biblical texts are chosen for us, essentially. An Old Testament lesson, a psalm, a New Testament lesson, and a gospel lesson. The pastors and staff then plan worship based on these and what kind of suits their fancy and matches the needs of the congregation in their perspective. So this Sunday, the New Testament lesson that Marilyn read is from the book of Acts, of Paul's first venture onto European soil and the country of Macedonia and Greece, which go together, to spread the gospel message. More specifically, it's the story of the conversion of Lydia in the important Roman city of Philippi. Well, this particular passage tickles my fancy. In the history of Christianity, this is a powerful and memorable text. One of the reasons is because there is Paul dealing with the women. Paul's gotten a bad rap about his dealing with women, primarily about what others wrote and attributed to him, but he was very open with women in ministry, if you will, for lack of a better way of describing it. Well, now, this passage has a special meaning for me. This past February, our son Ian and I went on a cruise of the Greek Isles through a company called Educational Opportunities, and it was called In the Footsteps of Paul. And one of the first places we went was this ancient city of Philippi. We later went on to many of the other prominent places of Paul's ministry, doing it by a cruise ship. So it was a very meaningful trip, and it was a lot of fun as well. Well, the story is pretty straightforward. Paul is on what we call his second missionary journey, and he goes through Asia Minor, now what we know as Turkey, his home territory, visiting the towns of his first missionary journey, trying to build up those early communities of Christ's followers, which he founded. But at one point, in a dream, he witnesses a man from Macedonia calling over to him to come over and to help his people, help the people of Greece and Europe. And so thereby, Paul agrees to do that, and he goes over with his entourage and steps foot on Greek and European soil for the very first time. He gets to Philippi very quickly. Philippi was a leading Roman city. You know, the Romans, when they went someplace, they built to stay, and they stayed for hundreds of years. Well, as was his custom, he sought out the Jews of the city. He did that everywhere he went. And he was directed, this time, to a place outside the city where many of the women gathered to pray, regularly by the river. He talks with their leader, Lydia, a successful seller of purple cloth. He converts her, he baptizes her and her household, and ends up staying with them. Later, he runs afoul of some others and he gets thrown into prison, but that's another story for another day. Now, Paul wasn't there for long, but look at the impact that he had. From here, he went on to Thessalonica, Athens, Corinth, and Ephesus on his second missionary journey. And our son Ian and I went to all of those places. So I need to show you some of what we're talking about here. Our son Ian took 1,400 pictures of this trip. I guarantee you I will spare you that whole thing. But here are several pictures of Philippi that you might be interested in. The first one coming right up. Okay, that is the city of Neapolis If you see on the right side of that is the port. That's the port where Paul would have come into as he came across the Aegean Sea from his home in Asia Minor. The city at that time would have been up the hill, right up from the port there. But go ahead, next one, please. He didn't stay there. Instead, he went to Philippi, which was about 20 miles north of Neapolis. And that is where Paul went because of its size, its traffic, its Roman saturation, and its overall importance. Here is a beautiful Greek Orthodox church right up from the river, which celebrates Paul's visit to the river. Next, please. Here is a place on the river which celebrates what might have been the location of Lydia and her people. And it's probably very authentic, right about in that place. And so there were the women praying, and Paul went to be with them. Right now, as you can see, it is set up as a place for baptisms. Next, please. There are inside this beautiful church, there are lots of colorful paintings, all celebrating Paul's life. Could have taken pictures all around the dome and all around the walls. It was just an absolutely beautiful scene and setting with all of those colorful pictures of Paul. And next, please. And this is a beautiful baptismal font right in the middle of that church, no doubt used quite a bit by this Greek Orthodox church. Next one, please. This is actually me looking out over the city of Philippi. They say that Philippi right now has only been excavated about 15%, and those excavations will continue as different groups do them. Now, over on the the left-hand side of that, you'll see what looks like a road. Well, that's the ancient Roman road that traveled from the Adriatic Sea to what became Constantinople and Istanbul. Philippi was right on that traveled road. Many, many Roman travelers and armies have been on that road back in the time of Rome. And 1,000 years later, many Crusader armies took that road. Next, please. There's another view of some of the ruins. By the way, the ruins are being excavated very, very slowly because they want to be purely authentic. They want it to be exactly the way Philippi was, and they only do what they know. They don't just make it up and go on. But that's another view of the ruins. And next, please. This is the Roman amphitheater that's in Philippi. And that's our very flamboyant guide right there. The Romans built an amphitheater virtually everywhere they went. They used it for theater, and they also used it for gladiator fights. And next, please. And this is another view of some of the ruins as the walkways went right up into the amphitheater. And next, please. This is claimed to be the prison, the cave-like prison where Paul was thrown into. And as the story goes, an earthquake shattered it all, and they could have escaped, but they didn't. And anyway, that's another story. Okay, next, please. Oh, yeah. And this is the lunch we were served after exploring the ruins. As you probably know, Greece is known for its great food. They take pride in their food, and our guides would tell us that you have to look really, really hard to find bad food in Greece. Well, that certainly has been my experience on a couple of trips there. So the book of Acts tells us that Paul saw a Macedonian man in a dream who beckoned him over from Asia to Europe to help the people. Okay, that sounds good. Who am I to argue with the book of Acts? But this is what I think. I really think that Paul decided to go to Greece for the food. So hold on to that thought. This past April, my wife Diane and I took a trip south to do a civil rights tour. We have wanted to do this for years, and it was finally the time. Jim Willoughby and Deb Search Willoughby also took a similar trip this spring, and with them we semi-jokingly and semi-seriously declared with them that this was going to be part of our resistance, that this was going to be part of our protest to the state of our national politics. Now we know that a couple of extra tickets to go into a museum or $40 for tickets to go into the coffers of another museum isn't going to amount to much on a resistance or a protest level. And yet it felt like that to us. It felt like a resistance of sorts. It felt good for our souls. Deb recites how so many of the people who were at the museums that they attended, primarily black people, encouraged her and others to come, and please go back and tell your friends to come here. And that was a great witness for Deb. Now Diane, my wife Diane, is much more high-minded than I am. Because actually, I went mostly for the food. It has been a long time since I have had any good catfish and hush puppies and fried okra. So while she was being studious, while she was celebrating the courage of our civil rights people, while she was lamenting over the state of our racist society, I was looking for the catfish. I found some. Well, here are some pictures of that trip. First, this is Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, where 9 African American students attended in 1957 to further desegregation in response to Brown versus Board of Education. President Eisenhower had to call in federal troops to be deployed there to ensure their safety. Next, please. This is a statue of the Little Rock Nine on the grounds of the Capitol, the state capital of Arkansas, in Little Rock. From Little Rock, we went to Memphis. And in Memphis, of course, there is the Lorraine Motel, and that's the famous sign that no doubt you've seen before. The Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. The Lorraine Motel is now a National Civil Rights Museum. And this is the famous balcony where the wreath is, where Dr. King was shot by James Earl Ray from some buildings, some boarding houses just across the way. From Memphis, we went to Birmingham, and this is the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, where 4 little girls were blown up as part of Bull Connor and the KKK's bombing campaign in 1963. There's a magnificent, as an aside, there's a magnificent civil rights museum right next to that, and it was closed on the Monday that we were at, but I long to go back there again. This is a beautiful memorial of the 4 little girls in a park across the 16th Street, from the 16th Street Baptist Church. Next, please. From Birmingham, we went down to Selma. And this is the famous shot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I hope most of you know the story of that. We certainly learned a lot while we were there. And next, please. We also wanted to drive the entire way from Selma to Montgomery and match the 4-day march that occurred back in 1963. There's a magnificent National Park Museum there, lots of historic sites along the way. And here's a memorial on that road from Selma to Montgomery, where a woman by the name of Viola Luisi was killed by the Klan. She was from Detroit. She was a white mother of 5. She went down to Selma to help, and she was driving marchers back and forth between the two cities when she was shot and killed by the Klan. Next, please. Yes, this is Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. This was Dr. King's first pastorate after he graduated from our own United Methodist Boston School of Theology, Boston University School of Theology. When he graduated with his PhD, he landed at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and the Montgomery bus boycott, this would have been 1955, was just starting, and he was quickly named the spokesperson for this bus boycott. And of course, his career, I guess you'd call it that, his prophecy, his prophetic witness just grew from there. This is a historical marker in Montgomery where Rosa Parks refused to leave her seat in 1955. This is at the location where the bus was stopped, and it's right outside the Rosa Parks Museum. After the boycott, and I didn't really know this at the when we were there, after the boycott, Rosa Parks and her husband could not get jobs in Montgomery. So they moved to Detroit within months of within a year of the end of the boycott. They moved to Detroit because she had a brother there. And as a person who grew up in Detroit, I am very, very proud to say that she spent the rest of her life in Detroit, and she had a very successful career. And finally, this is the original building of the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery. Now it's another civil rights museum. I hope and I pray that these sites, these museums, this so much a part of our history, survives the current mess that we are in. Well, let's shift gears a little bit again. There is a branch of theology, theology being the study of God, that is called process theology. Now, Orthodox theology in Christian traditions has seen God as unchanging, as perfect, as perfected, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The thinking, of course, on the part of Orthodox theologians, and part of me is one, and part of you is one as well, is that God is not limited or diminished in any way, and so therefore is fully developed, fully unchangeable, fully perfect, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, if you will. But this other branch of thinking, called process theology, sees God as evolving with creation and with the universe. It sees God as growing and, quote unquote, in process, just like each one of us, and in fact, all of creation. The focus of process theology is on becoming rather than on being. As you might guess, the witness of the Bible goes both ways. But also, as you might guess, what Orthodox theologians might say, they would say that this understanding of God in process is a heresy, not even worthy of being under the Christian umbrella. Well, let me pause a moment for an infomercial. This is an infomercial. Excuse me, I got to get some things out of the way here. I'm a little rusty on how you move around the pulpit, so bear with me if you will. Okay, the infomercial. This fall, we're going to do an adult Sunday school class called A Potluck of Hot Potatoes. A potluck of hot potatoes. In this class, we're going to look at some of the controversial sets of topics of our faith. Process theology will be included as one of those topics. Also to be included would be biblical fundamentalism, atonement understandings, Calvinism and predestination, prosperity theology, and Christian triumphalism. So all you Orthodox types are out there, you are invited to this class. And all you heretics out there, you are invited to this class. That is going to be a lot of fun. But back to process theology, especially for you heretics out there. There is an understanding in process theology that I think just applies to everyday living. It suggests that our lives and our relationships with God are made up of the accumulation of actual occasions, which are events in our lives. Actual occasion is kind of the term that's used in this discussion of process. Everything we do and everything we participate in builds on itself and builds on each other. And that is where the process, part of process theology, makes a lot of sense as opposed to the static nature of Orthodox thinking about God. And all of these actual occasions have impact on who we are becoming and how God is becoming. And they have consequences in our becoming and how God is becoming. And they have consequences in our future. Perhaps a close analogy might be karma. We use the word karma in our everyday parlance, if you will. We have a vague understanding of what it means, even though it's a Hindu and Buddhist concept. Now, these actual occasions build upon each other and are influenced by God and in turn influence God, that mutuality. God is not understood to be coercive, nor beholden to some kind of a preordained plan, but rather, God is the epitome of love, influencing love and reacting to love. So here are a handful of some of the finer points if you heretics out there want to subscribe to process theology for today and for the concept of actual occasions. 1, everything we do can and does have a purpose. So even the smallest or more random act of kindness or senseless act of beauty has a purpose. And every prayer that you utter builds the purposes of your life. 2, everything has potentiality. No matter how small, no matter how seemingly insignificant, what we do and say has potential for change and growth and relationship and justice. 3, God values relationship more than result. 4, God is already in the actual occasion that we take part in. 5, in Wesleyan terms, human beings move on to perfection in this life and the life to come, in the language and understanding of John Wesley, through sanctifying grace and the build-up of actual occasions. 6, so it matters that each actual occasion, no matter how large or how small, adds to your relationship with God, your karma, if you will, as we move on to perfection in this life and the life to come, as Wesley stated it. So it matters if you visit a biblical site where Paul walked, or a civil rights museum, or a civil rights site. And even if you're only buying 2 tickets and adding $40 to the coffers of that museum, it matters. Now, if you are in protest mode right now in our country, and you are paralyzed by thoughts that you can't make a difference or have an impact, or that anything you do or say or pray doesn't amount to a hill of beans, know this, that none of these actions are meaningless. Every actual occasion builds on your being, on your relationship with God, and God's relationship in love with you and with this world. And as the scriptures inform us, God hears the cries of God's people, and change ultimately happens. And so it matters what you're doing in Kalamazoo if you're in this kind of protest resistance mode. If you go to a Wednesday faithful witness protest over on the City Hall steps, or you're part of any other form of resistance or protest in this city or around, it matters and it builds. So don't lose heart. And finally, so even if you're like Paul, or you're like me, and you first show up only for the food, something really significant might happen. Thanks be to God. Amen.